Hi, my name is Louisa Sijabat. I'm a registered liquidator and trustee in bankruptcy. So a lot of people have heard these words thrown around: bankruptcy, liquidation, insolvency, receivership, but it's not always clear what the difference between them is. So hopefully this video helps to clarify that. So in Australia, insolvency is like an umbrella term. It means that someone or something like a company can't pay their debts when they're due to be paid. So they're insolvent. So they're going through insolvency. Now this is broken down into two main groups. The first is individuals and the second is companies. When individuals experience insolvency, they can go into something called bankruptcy. So in Australia, bankruptcy is when an individual person can't pay their debts when they're due to be paid and go through a formal legal process. So what is confusing about the word bankruptcy is that in the US, they use the word bankruptcy to relate to companies. But that system doesn't exist in Australia, and in Australia the word bankruptcy relates to individuals only. What makes it confusing though is that most of the movies are made in the US and they'll refer to companies going bankrupt, but that's not a phrase that can exist legally properly in Australia. So that covers individuals who go through bankruptcy if they need to go through an insolvency process. But what about companies? So companies can go through something called either a liquidation or a voluntary administration. So a liquidation is essentially an orderly close down of the company in nearly all of the cases. So what this means is that it's recognised that the company can no longer pay its debts when they're due to be paid and need to close down the business in an orderly way. Sometimes though, the management of the company might look at the company and think that some bits of it are salvageable, or bits could be sold, or there could perhaps be some debt restructure plan or a plan put to creditors for them to consider so that the company might be able to keep trading. So this generally happens if the business isn't too small and if there's some sort of value there that could be rescued, that there's some worthwhile core business that might exist. So sometimes what management want to do is to evaluate those possibilities and see if any of those things can happen other than just the immediate closing down of the company. So what they can choose to do is go through what's called a voluntary administration. It's usually about a 6-week process, give or take a couple of weeks, where management, together with the voluntary administrator, which is somebody who's a registered liquidator by qualification but acting in a voluntary administrator's role, will evaluate what can be done with the company. Can it be saved? Can some of the business be saved? Can some of these employees keep their jobs? Or is that just wishful thinking? Is there no actual practical means of carrying that out? So a voluntary administration can result in a rescue plan for the company, which is called a deed of company arrangement, or if no rescue plan is feasible, it can result then in the liquidation of the company. So another word that gets thrown around a little bit is this word receivership. So a receivership sits outside the structure we've talked about a little bit so far. With the structure we've talked about so far, these roles of bankruptcy trustee or liquidator or voluntary administrator, this is someone like me who looks at the company as a whole, like all the bits of the company for the benefit of its creditors, and looks at it holistically. A receiver has a more niche job. So a receiver's job is to act for one secured creditor. Usually it's one. In theory it could be more, I suppose, but usually it's one. Typically this could be a bank or a non-bank lender, but they have to have what's called a secured debt. So the secured creditor must have loaned money and have taken some sort of security. Sometimes the security can be over the business and its assets, or there might be other security. The directors might have put up their own personal real estate or something like that. So a receiver's job is to recover that particular secured creditor's debt only. So that can be a recovery from anything that secured creditor took security over. So that's what the word receivership means. It usually applies to companies. In theory, it can actually apply to individuals because I've had appointments both as receivers over companies and receivers over individuals, but usually most times you hear it'll be in relation to companies. Well, I hope that helps clarify things. If you've got any questions, drop them to me in the comment below.